Saudi Arabia has never been an ordinary country. From the moment oil was discovered here, the kingdom has lived in the shadow of two realities, one rooted in the traditions of the desert, the other open to the world and its ambitions. Today, in the era of Vision 2030, this duality takes on a new meaning. Because every step forward, every investment, every reform, every NEOM project is at the same time an attempt to reconcile two opposing forces, loyalty to the past and desire for the future. The next episode of our story about Saudi Arabia and NEOM is exactly about this in-between space. It's about the question of how to build a bridge between a Bedouin drinking bitter coffee in the shade of a tent and a young startup founder coding an app in a co-working space in NEOM. It's an attempt to understand whether Saudi Arabia can remain faithful to its tribal roots and at the same time be ready to enter the global league of innovators. This is where three worlds meet. The world of tradition, where religion and family set the rhythm of life. The world of modernity, ruled by technology, capital, and ambition. And the world of politics, where the decisions of a single prince can change the fate of millions. In this episode, we'll look at how these worlds overlap, sometimes in harmony and sometimes in dramatic conflict. We'll follow the tracks of everyday life, from conversations in cafes and mosques, through business meetings in Riyadh, all the way to NEOM's futuristic labs. We'll see how political decisions and architects' visions are reflected in the eyes of ordinary people, and how young Saudis try to reconcile family pressure with their own dreams of freedom and success. Because in the end, it won't be refineries or palaces that decide the future of Arabia. It will be that third element, the daily lives of the people who have to find their place at the junction of worlds. On the northern fringes of Arabia, where the desert gives way to rocky mountains, you can still meet Bedouins. Their tents stand beside grazing camels, and life flows at a rhythm that has changed very little for centuries. The morning coffee, prepared in a brass pot, is served according to an old ritual. Conversations are about family, weather, animal prices. This is a world where time is measured not by a watch but by the sun and shadows. A few hundred kilometers away, in Riyadh, a business meeting is taking place on the roof of a new skyscraper. Young managers, some educated in London or New York, talk about investments in artificial intelligence and renewable energy. In the background stretches the city skyline. Glass office towers, highways full of luxury cars, shopping malls that look more like Dubai than old Arabia. Here, the small cup of coffee is replaced by a latte in a paper cup from a trendy spot. Conversations revolve around markets, apps, contracts. This is a world where time is measured in deadlines and PowerPoint presentations. These two images exist simultaneously, a tent in the desert and a skyscraper in Riyadh. And both are real. Saudi Arabia lives in a double rhythm, one rooted in tradition, the other racing toward the future. An anthropologist would say it is a hybrid society, a country where different life models exist side by side, not always in harmony, but always in dialogue. Abdulrahman, our protagonist from previous chapters, is a symbol of this tension. When he visits his grandfather in the countryside, he sits with him by the fire, listens to stories about old caravan routes and drinks bitter coffee, even though he'd prefer an energy drink from the fridge. When he returns to the city, he puts on a shirt, opens his laptop, and dreams of a career in NEOM. Grandfather says the desert gives you freedom, he tells his friends, and I think freedom comes from the internet. In that small difference of opinion lies the drama of an entire generation. The older ones see freedom in what is known and enduring. The young see it in what is new and global. The desert versus the skyscraper. Tradition versus innovation. But this tension doesn't have to mean open conflict. Sometimes it becomes a source of inspiration. Architects designing NEOM say they want to combine the soul of the desert with the technology of the future. In the city's promotional materials, images of futuristic trains appear alongside camels and sand. It's an attempt to create a new identity, not by rejecting the past, but by reinterpreting it. The question is whether balance can be found. Can a tent and a skyscraper exist in one society without excluding each other? Can Abdul Rahman and his grandfather find a common language? Or does the future mean that one of these worlds will have to give way to the other? This is the real stake of this episode, understanding how to live at the intersection of worlds. Because the future of Saudi Arabia will not be decided only in budgets and contracts. It will be decided in the hearts of people who must choose whether they can live both in the shade of the tent and in the glow of the skyscraper. And religion? In Saudi Arabia, there is no life outside religion. Islam is not just a faith, but a system that structures everyday existence, from the first prayer at dawn to the last recited at night. 5 times a day, the muezzin's call fills the air. In Riyadh, it echoes off glass towers. In oases, it spreads over desert valleys. Even in office buildings full of startups, when the call to prayer sounds, some employees put their laptops aside, go to the prayer room, and return only after a few minutes of silence and focus. It's precisely here, at the junction of religion and the market, that Vision 2030's biggest challenge is revealed. Economic reforms speak the language of profit, innovation, and contracts. Religion speaks the language of divine law, duty, and tradition. How do you merge these two languages into one story about the future? Imagine a meeting in a Riyadh office. On one side, an American consultant used to PowerPoint decks and discussions about KPIs. On the other, a Saudi manager who, halfway through the meeting, excuses himself to go and pray. For the foreigner, this can be exotic, sometimes even frustrating. For the Saudi, it is obvious. This isn't conflict. It's an everyday reality you have to learn to navigate. Islam also regulates the economy. Islamic banking forbids interest, so credit doesn't work the way it does in Europe. Instead, there are other mechanisms: leasing, profit sharing, project finance. For an investor from London or New York, this demands a new approach. And for young Saudis, it's a lesson that modernity doesn't have to mean copying the West. They can build their own models rooted in religion. At the same time, tensions appear. Mohammed bin Salman's reforms open space for tourism, entertainment, concerts. But conservative clerics still have a voice. They warn against moral decay. They criticize changes that are too rapid. It's like a balancing act. On one side, the state wants modernization. On the other, it cannot openly oppose a religion that, for millions, is the foundation of life. Abdul Rahman talks about this with his friends. My father believes everything must comply with religion. I think God gave us reason so we could create new things. Why should technology be against Islam? This question is echoed by many young Saudis. They are trying to combine spirituality with modernity instead of setting one against the other. Anthropologists point out that Saudi Arabia is going through a process they call religious modernization. It's not about rejecting Islam, but about reinterpreting it. About making prayer coexist with coding and fasting in Ramadan, with work in a global corporation. The market needs flexibility. Religion needs rules. Vision 2030 tries to prove that one does not exclude the other. That a modern Arabia can be both a center of innovation and true to its heritage. The question is whether this reconciliation will succeed, because if the balance tips, if the market begins to dominate religion, or religion paralyzes the market, the whole project could collapse like a house of cards. For now, both worlds move side by side. In a Riyadh skyscraper, prayer and presentation fit into the same calendar. In Neom, spaces are planned where mosques will stand next to laboratories. And in the hearts of young Saudis, the conviction grows that the future does not have to mean abandoning faith. Because in Saudi Arabia, modernity does not arrive instead of Islam, it arrives with it. Just a few years ago, the sight of a woman driving a car in Saudi Arabia seemed impossible. The ban had been in place for decades, and breaking it could lead not only to fines, but to ostracism. It was the father, brother, or husband who decided when and where a woman could go. They were the guardians, the overseers, and, in practice, the owners of her public life. Today, the picture looks different. On the streets of Riyadh and Jeddah, you increasingly see women behind the wheel, some in long black abayas, others in colorful headscarves. sometimes in jeans and shirts. Their presence is more than just a legal change. It is a symbol that Vision 2030 is not only about the economy, but also about a social revolution. In co-working cafes where Abdul Rahman and his friends discuss apps, female computer science students are appearing more and more often. They bring their laptops, talk about code, take part in startup competitions. My mother never had that chance, says Aisha, Abdul Rahman's sister. Her life revolved around home and children. I want to write software. I want to create something new. Why shouldn't I? Aisha's voice becomes the symbol of an entire generation of Saudi women stepping out of the shadows. Not all of them, not everywhere, not yet, but increasingly boldly. This change is anything but simple. In many families, women's roles are still understood in traditional terms, as daughters, wives, mothers. Even if the law allows them to study or work, family decisions can still be a barrier. My father agreed that I could study computer science, says another young woman in an interview, but he said he doesn't want me working with men in an office. For him, that's still too much. Here, the anthropological tension within Saudi Arabia becomes very clear. The state pushes women towards the labor market, tourism, culture, and technology. The family often pushes them back into the home. Some women step onto conference stages, others still stand in the shadows, unsure whether the world outside is a place for them. The contrast is striking. On one hand, at the Future Investment Initiative in Riyadh, a Saudi woman executive stands on stage, in an abaya, but with a laptop in hand, confident, speaking fluent English. On the other, in a small village in the south, a girl finishes high school and returns home where, in her family's eyes, the only future is an early marriage. Vision 2030 assumes that women will become half the workforce, that they will work, create, manage. But that means more than new laws. It means a mental shift in fathers, brothers, and husbands, but also in the women themselves, who for years were taught that their role is to remain silent. Aisha speaks about this openly. When I tell my family I want to work in NEOM, they look at me like I'm a dreamer. But I know that if we, women, don't enter this future, NEOM will be only for men, and that's not a future worth fighting for. Her words sound like the manifesto of a generation that no longer wants to live only in the shadows. For the outside world, the role of women in Saudi Arabia is the ultimate test of how sincere the reforms are. Because if women truly become partners in business, innovation, and culture, then the change is real. If they remain only symbols on conference stages, while being constrained in everyday life, the vision will turn out to be a hollow stage set. That's why women are at the center of this episode, because they will decide whether the new Arabia is truly different or just repainted for global audiences. The way Saudi society views foreigners looks very similar to the debate about women's roles. Saudi Arabia has always been a land of pilgrims. Every year, millions of Muslims from all over the world come to Mecca and Medina to fulfill the religious obligation of Hajj. But pilgrims arrived for a short time and left, taking back prayers, memories, and photographs. The new Saudi Arabia wants something else: foreigners who stay, who work, invest, create, and even live in Neom and other modern cities. This changes the kingdom's daily life. In Riyadh's offices, you increasingly hear English, Hindi, Tagalog, French. On Neom construction sites, thousands of workers from Pakistan, India, Egypt, and the Philippines are employed. Hotels hire staff from Africa and Asia. And in conference rooms, Saudi managers sit side by side with executives from London or New York. For locals, this is something new, and sometimes a challenge. All his life, my father spoke only with neighbors and family, Abdul Rahman says, and I deal with foreigners every day at the office. It's a different language, different habits, a different mindset. You have to learn it. But diversity also brings tension. Many Saudis feel that foreigners come, earn huge salaries, and leave without leaving anything behind. In conversations, you hear references to privileged expats living in gated compounds with swimming pools, while local young people still live with their parents and can't afford their own place. Anthropologists describe this as a clash of two hierarchies. In the old Saudi Arabia, status depended on lineage, religion, and loyalty to the royal family. In the new one, status increasingly depends on competence, English skills, a foreign university degree. It's a painful shift because it means a young Saudi must now compete not only with his cousin next door, but also with a manager from London or an engineer from India. This is clearly visible in NEOM. The project is marketed as a city of the world, but in practice, this means Saudis will have to share space with people whose habits are radically different. Urban plans mention zones for foreigners, Western-style bars and restaurants, co-working spaces where men and women work side by side. For some, this is exciting. For others, unsettling. My uncle says Neom is not Arabia. It's a foreign city on our land, Aisha says. But I think this is exactly what we need, to learn to live with others, to see the world in practice, not just on our phone screens. And that's the core of it. Will foreigners become part of Arabia, or will they remain just temporary guests? Will locals learn to see them as partners, or only as competitors? These are not just economic questions. They are questions about identity. For years, Saudi Arabia was a closed world where foreigners were rare. Now it is opening its doors, and still doesn't know what exactly it will find on the other side. Perhaps a new multicultural mosaic will emerge, making the country a center of both the Islamic world and the global one. Or perhaps the differences will prove too great, and Neom will become an enclave of outsiders, while Saudis continue living as before just beyond its borders. Either way, this encounter is inevitable, because Vision 2030 cannot be realized without foreigners, just as it cannot be realized without locals. The kingdom's future depends on whether these two worlds can find a way to speak a shared language, not just English, but the language of common interests, dreams, and values. Generation 2030. That's what people have started calling the young Saudis growing up in the era of Vision 2030. Not by accident. They are the protagonists of the greatest social experiment in the kingdom's history. The older generations built a country on oil. The middle one consumed its fruits. The young must prove they can turn that legacy into something new. When Abdul Rahman sits with his friends in a cafe, his conversations are different from the ones his father had with his own peers. The father talked about camel prices, then about his job at the refinery, about a salary that covered a house, a car, and a quiet life. Abdul Rahman talks about apps, about the global market, about needing languages, networks, and sales skills. These are two different definitions of security. For the father, security is a state paycheck. For the son, the ability to compete in a world that doesn't recognize borders. But the difference is not just generational, it's psychological. Generation 2030 is the first to face a situation where not everything is handed to them on a silver platter. The government introduces taxes, cuts some subsidies, pushes the young into work outside the public sector. This means they have to learn to compete, something they never had to do before. Many young people discover how hard this is. All my life I've been told the state will take care of me, says a student from Riyadh. And now I hear I have to take care of myself. It's not easy, but probably necessary. Generation 2030 is also the first to truly compare itself with the world. Smartphones and the internet mean young Saudis see how their peers live in Dubai, London, Los Angeles. They know the world isn't waiting. They know that if they want to be competitive, they must learn faster, work harder, and think more broadly than their parents. At the same time, they carry the weight of tradition. Family still expects loyalty. Religion still sets the rhythm of life. Society still looks suspiciously at those who behave too Western. Generation 2030 has to do something incredibly difficult. Be modern and traditional at the same time. That's why people say Vision 2030 is not only an economic project, but also a test of character for the whole nation. Because whether Neom becomes a living city or just a futuristic film set will not be decided by budget lines, but by the determination of young people. Saudi Arabia is a country where the state doesn't just regulate life, it creates it. From the beginning of the kingdom, an individual's fate has been intertwined with the will of the Al Saud dynasty. It wasn't citizens who fought for their rights, it was the rulers who decided which privileges and obligations they would be given. This principle still holds even in the Vision 2030 era. Mohammed bin Salman, Crown Prince, Prime Minister and Chief Architect of the reforms, is both the face and the hand of this logic. On one side, he opens doors, allowing women to drive, legalizing cinemas and concerts, inviting the world to Neom. On the other, he keeps those same doors in his grip, and anyone who tries to open them without permission risks being silenced. An anthropologist would say that in Saudi Arabia, the individual is not the source of change, they are the recipient. Modernization comes from above, as a decision by the authorities, not as a bottom-up process. Citizens don't fight for rights, they are granted them. As a result, even freedom is conditional. It is given, not won. This creates a particular mentality. On one hand, gratitude to the state for new opportunities. On the other, the sense that these opportunities are fragile and dependent on political will. A paradox emerges. Young Saudis dream of independence, but know they cannot realize it without the state's approval. In the West, Vision 2030 inspires both admiration and unease. Admiration, because the reforms are fast and bold. Unease, because they unfold in the shadow of repression. Mohammed bin Salman shows the world modern images of women at the wheel, but at the same time, journalists and critics land in prison. For investors, this means a game of double standards. The contracts worth billions are tempting, but each is signed with an awareness that everything depends on political stability. And in Saudi Arabia, political stability is the stability of absolute power, strong yet fragile, because it rests on one man. Vision 2030 is, in essence, an attempt to rewrite the social contract. The old one said, "We give you oil and privileges, you give us loyalty." The new one says, "We give you reforms and opportunities, but loyalty remains mandatory." Will the young generation accept this contract? Or in a few years will they demand something more? Real freedom, not just privileges? That question hangs in the air and may be the most important test of Vision 2030. The relationship between state and individual in Saudi Arabia is like a dance where one partner leads and the other follows. But the young are increasingly asking whether they must always be the ones being led. Abdul Rahman dreams that his success will truly be his, not just part of the state's narrative. Aisha wants to believe that her right to study and work is not a temporary gesture, but something permanent. These are questions without answers, for now. But one thing is clear. No reform, no investment, and no futuristic project will last if people do not feel it truly belongs to them. The state can grant a driver's license, award a contract, proclaim a vision, but it cannot grant a soul. That belongs to the individual. Today, Saudi Arabia stands not so much on a straight road as at a crossroads. On one side, Bedouin tents where life flows slowly, guided by prayer times and the sun. On the other, Riyadh's glass towers and Neom's renderings, where the future is supposed to take the shape of a futuristic line slicing across the desert. These two worlds are not a metaphor. They are daily reality. They exist side by side, intertwine, and sometimes collide with full force. In this space, a story is being written that has no precedent. A state that for decades symbolized conservatism, isolation, and dependence on oil is trying to turn itself into a laboratory of the future. But transformation does not happen in a vacuum. It happens in people's hearts, in their choices and fears. Abdul Rahman, his sister Aisha, their father and grandfather, each of them carries a piece of this story. The grandfather repeats that freedom comes from the desert. The father believes in the security of the refinery. The young want to take risks and join the global game, even if it means giving up the comfort of certainty. Vision 2030 is not just billions of dollars, contracts, and big conferences. It's an attempt to write a new social contract, one in which the state still dominates but citizens are given the impression of greater agency. These are reforms that are both a gift and a reminder that freedom comes from above and can be taken back. That's why every success, a woman driving, foreigners investing in NEOM, young programmers working in co-work spaces, carries within it the question of whether this is a lasting change or just a temporary stage design. The contrast between tradition and modernity, between religion and the market, between state and individual, is more visible in Saudi Arabia than almost anywhere else. Every step forward can just as easily be the beginning of a stumble. In a country where the will of a single prince decides everything, the future is always a hostage of the present. And yet, when you look at young Saudis, it's hard to shake the feeling that something really is changing. Their conversations in cafes, their dreams of working in NEOM, their certainty that the world won't wait and that it's time to finally join it. These are no longer just repeated slogans. They are everyday realities that slowly, hesitantly, but consistently build a new identity. The end of this episode is not a conclusion, but an open question. Will the state and the individual find a common language? Will the young accept that their freedom is on loan, or will they one day want to truly reclaim it? Will NEOM become a symbol of modernity, or an expensive museum of ambition? The desert will only answer in a few decades. But even today, it is clear that the struggle for Saudi Arabia's future is being waged not only on stock exchanges and in palaces, but also in cafes, co-works, and living rooms, in conversations between fathers and sons, mothers and daughters. It is there that it will be decided whether this country really becomes something more than a kingdom of the barrel.